Oh, there's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel, and I am in such a good mood. I'm starting my Friday reads in this little parkette about an hour later than I usually do. It's 8:15, and I lucked out because it's completely empty. It's often got at least a couple people wandering around at 7 in the morning, but there's not a breath of wind. I found a bit of a shady spot, but the biggest reason I'm in a good mood is because Kenji was supposed to cut my hair last night. Kenji's been cutting my hair. I bought a cheap pair of electric clippers, and I don't have much hair to cut, and I don't like going to the $10 barber shop because I have to take my mask off, and that's not something I'm comfortable with. So Kenji's been cutting my hair for the most part for more than a year, but you know, he's busy, and he didn't get home until I was asleep last night, so it didn't happen, and my hair was too long. You guys probably wouldn't have thought so, but this kind of very trendy hairstyle, we have to keep it really short. So to my surprise and delight, Kenji was awake and cheerful this morning at about 7:30 in the morning. He just bounced out of bed and he was singing a tune and smiley, and I was all ready to come out and film. And I said, "You wouldn't want to cut my hair right now, would you?" And he said, "Sure." So look at me. There's something about a fresh haircut that just makes life beautiful, don't you think? All right, I have had a great reading week, lots to tell you. Oh, lots to say. I have finished 4 books. The first one, I forgot to bring the paper copy, and that's probably because I abandoned it fairly early in favor of the ebook. The Slap by Christos Tsiolkas. 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. My pocketbook-sized thing, I'm just too old. I can't read that tiny print, or I can, but it just gives me a headache. It's just no good. So I sprung for the ebook and read probably 2/3 of it that way. It's a tremendous, emotionally powerful, self-indulgent novel, and I could forgive it almost all of its self-indulgences. Well, I obviously could. I gave it 5 stars. I'll start with the negative because I can kind of deal with that in one sentence. Tsiolkas is a gay man, and he writes all the sex in this book as if it's gay sex, and I don't think that any of the sex scenes were gay, but I didn't need all that. I didn't need the blow-by-blow, excuse the pun, I didn't need the play-by-play, the sex was hot, but why was all of the sex hot? That's not realistic. I've also finished a Edna O'Brien novel where she wrote just fabulously about bad sex. There was no bad sex in The Slap. I don't mean that there wasn't problematic sex, there definitely was, but that's kind of a typical gay thing, like sex, and I'm speaking from autobiographical, overindulgent experience, boys and girls, so I thought that could have been a lot less of the sex. Everything else, I loved. There are so many characters to hate in this novel. It's set in fairly modern times, and it's about, I think I'm going to do a review. So basically just to say that it's about a barbecue at this Australian couple's house, and a man slaps a really terribly violently misbehaving child that's not his own, a 6-year-old boy. I think he's 6, and it's not his kid, and so all hell breaks loose. There is litigation and bridges burned between family, friends, and cousins, and it just creates a huge mess. So compelling, such a everyday issue, written about in such a fascinating way. But the thing that I loved was each chapter was told in a different character's point of view, and so characters that you end up hating in several other chapters, once you get into their point of view, I mean, that's the gift of a wonderful novelist, to make you inhabit that character and at least become less judgmental, or to judge with a lot more understanding of character. It was a novel of polyphonic virtuosity. I loved it. I think I'm going to do a review. Famous last words. I recommend it heartily. A lot of people say that the characters are all despicable, and maybe speaking as a despicable person, I found all of them to be relatable, or at least I understood them. I could see that some people wouldn't get along with the book because There's just such a naked selfishness and self-centeredness to so many of the characters, but that kind of rings true to life, don't you think? I loved it. It's my first Tsiolkas. I am going to read all of his stuff. So that was for Aussie April. Also for Aussie April, I finished The Lebs by Mohammed, Ahmad. And I really liked this, ultimately didn't love it. It's one of the best written novels that I've read in a long time. The prose was just stellar. It's about a high school student. It's not a YA novel by any stretch of the imagination. I wouldn't have gotten past the first chapter if it had been a YA novel, but it is about a high school student, and that even is a bit of a stretch for Juan the Book Maniac. And I found it completely engrossing and such an unsettling novel. The protagonist is a Lebanese Australian guy, and he's going to I think it's based on a real school. What's it called? Punch Bowl School, the Punch Bowl Boys, and almost everybody in the school is Muslim or not white Australian, and the teachers seem to hate the students, and they don't care about teaching, and they let them watch porn in class. Did this really happen? I don't know, but he made it believable. It was such a testosterone-laden macho environment, and what makes the novel work to the degree that it does is that the protagonist is much more sensitive and artistic, but he has to engage to a certain degree with this hyper-masculine, anti-PC, hyper-sexualized culture and participate in it, never mind what he actually feels. And Ahmad shows that, dramatizes that in a way that was just, I was so uncomfortable for the whole book, and just agog at how well the story was told. Where the novel went to sleep, where I kind of went to sleep, was in the final, it wasn't that much, it was maybe the final fifth, it certainly wasn't a quarter of the novel, the final fifth or sixth of the novel, after the protagonist has graduated high school, and he gets involved with more people that are more to his liking, and he gets involved in some kind of drama project where they're doing role plays, and that's all that's happening. And it just wasn't nearly as engaging. It wasn't boring, but it was not as engaging, and I just wasn't sure why it was ending on that note. However, the last paragraph of the novel was stunning and packed an emotional wallop for me, so I do very highly recommend The Lebs by Mohammed, Ahmad. I also finished the third novel in the Country Girls trilogy yesterday. It's called Girls and Their Married Bliss, and I was kind of cringing at the title until I read the book, because it's a very ironic title. Trust me, it's Edna O'Brien, and it wasn't as good as the other two. It was a 4-star read. As a young writer, this was published, I think the third one was maybe published in 1967. She was experimenting with point of view, and it was an interesting experiment that didn't work, or it only worked partially. So for the first time, we didn't have the story told in first person from the main character Kate's point of view. In this third novel, the point of view alternates between her best frenemy, Baba, in her voice, first person Baba, chapters, and third person, mostly limited but a little bit omniscient, focused on Kate. And those chapters focused on Kate made her seem like such a victim and so passive and so... Well, definitely she did have mental health crises in this part of the story, but she just seemed like a sad sack, and whereas there was a vitality to her when she was telling her own story, and it just got lost when O'Brien switched the point of view, but I still enjoyed it, and it had some great descriptions of bad sex and all the things that women of this generation in the UK, Irish in London in this case, had to contend with marriage and all that kind of bullshit. So I still really liked it, and I recommend the entire series highly, but this one was a bit weaker than the first two. This was a fabulous buddy read with Sonia of An Enthusiastic Reader, and we are next going to read Edna O'Brien's memoir, which I think is called Country Girl, just published maybe 10 years ago. And we're going to read that, I think, for Nonfiction November. So the Edna O'Brien reading challenge continues. And late last night, I finished the audiobook of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And it was really stupid, boring. I didn't give a shit about anything. It was a kind of mediocre audio production. I don't know. I'm not going to, now that I've described it thusly, I'm not going to tell you who the narrator... Well, no, I'll put it in the show notes. I don't remember. But I mean, I could just dismiss this in one sentence by saying the movie's better, but I just wasn't interested in the story. It seemed so limp and boring compared to the movie. But that might have had something to do with the audio production, but I really only gave it 3/4 of my attention at the most. It was the first negative experience I've had with reading children's lit in 2021, so I gave it 2 stars. Hey, well, I completely forgot about one of the best books that I finished reading this week, because Goodreads is screwing up and my brain was obviously not screwed on tightly enough this morning that I missed it because of a Goodreads glitch. I'm having trouble when I mark a book as finished that doesn't take, and it ends up still staying in current reading, but read in 2021. Like it, I was having so much trouble with it, with all the books that I finished up, and this one I didn't catch. So when I was looking at my Goodreads this morning, sleepy-headedly, didn't notice that this one was missing. So it is the Equatorial Guinea novel by Juan Tomás Ávila Laurel. It seems to be pronounced like a W sound from what I could find. Somebody can correct me. If I didn't know better, I would say Juan Tomás Ávila Laurel, but I'm hearing it on YouTube as Laurel. The Equatoguinean, there's the demonym, Equatoguinean, according to Wikipedia, writer. By Night the Mountain Burns. Translated by Jethro Sutar. I loved it. First person, it read like an oral narrative with all of the cues that you would get in a long oral tale that were a bit strange in a novel. It didn't read so much like a novel. I found it very comforting. The prose was just so easy to read, and the story was very strange. So it's set on a remote island off the coast of Africa. Lowell himself his parents were from the remote island of Annobon, so perhaps that's where it's set. I'm not going to do a review of this book, so I'm going to try to just tell you about it here in my Friday Reads. Well, the story is narrated by the adult narrator. Most of it is through the eyes of his much, much younger self, and life on this island is very strange, and his family is unlike all the other families on the island in that he lives in a house full of children and women, and his one grandfather, who doesn't go out and fish, doesn't do anything, sits on the balcony. The house is facing the wrong way. There's a lot in this novel about which direction, whether you're facing the sea or not, that was really intriguing. And the grandfather is kind of mysterious. He doesn't talk. He just sits there all day, and there's all these women in the house, and we don't ever really find out which one is the boy's mother, and we don't find out anything about the grandmother. Like, the narrative is focused very intensely on a few people and a few stories, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that you typically expect to have explained to you, like they're living in this house, but we don't ever find out which of the women is his mother, and he doesn't seem to care. And the boys all pee the bed every night, and we never find out why. What's that about? There's just a whole bunch of weird stuff. There's some supernatural elements, the way that religion and colonial culture and colonial countries stealing their fish, and contact between colonials and natives, and language issues. It has a really meandering narrative style, and we hardly get anybody's names, and so whenever you get somebody's name, it seems shocking, and I don't know that I ever figured out what was going on with naming or the absence of naming. But the less that the characters are named in a book, the better I like it, because names are stupid in fiction, don't you think? I don't know how to talk about the novel. That's why I don't think I'll ever figure out how to talk about it. I'm so glad I read it. I will read anything else. I know he's got at least one other novel that's published by that same fabulous publisher, and other stories. What's the other one that he has published? The Guru Pledge. By Night the Mountain Burns, 2014. The Guru Pledge, 2017. Laurel is a fascinating guy. There's a documentary made about him, the writer from A Country Without Bookstores, but I can't find it. There's no way for me to get it online or buy the DVD yet, but I do want to see that. He is living in exile in Barcelona, He went on a hunger strike against the government in 2011, so I guess he was still in Equatorial Guinea. So I've now read 2 fabulous novels from Equatorial Guinea, the other one being that queer novel, La Bastarda by Trifonia Melabi Obono, translated by Lawrence Schimmel, which I also loved. So yeah, boy, for being such a tiny country, Equatorial Guinea is a hotbed of literary activity. So those are what I've finished. And I have one bale to tell you about. This North Korean novel, Friend by Paek Nam-Nyong, translated by Emmanuel Kim, was just terrible. I read the first chapter. I don't think I finished the first chapter. And, I mean, it was just a kind of soap opera-esque story about a judge and this famous, was she an opera singer or something? She wanted to divorce her husband, and it's like, who gives a shit about that? Not me. And the writing was terrible. And I'm not going to replace it with anything. There's nothing that's written by a North Korean that's available to me in English that I am interested in reading, which is not the same as saying that I don't care about. There was one collection of fiction that was smuggled out of North Korea 5 or 10 years ago that I read, and it was not bad, but it still wasn't very good literarily. I don't care about North Korean fiction in translation until there's something worth my time, and this one was not. I've started 5 others, plus that one bale. So, in no particular order, I have started my reread of The Yield by Tara June Winch, and I was doing it as an audio-text combo, and there was nothing wrong, per se, with the audio narration, but I realized that I didn't want it or need it. It wasn't deepening my experience of the book. I already had a deep connection to this novel. I just read it last month. So I've just finished it 10 days ago, and I'm immediately starting to reread it, and the audiobook was adding nothing to that, so I am just reading it very slowly, a chapter every other day, and making notes and just sinking into it, looking up stuff that I didn't look up the first time. This morning I looked up all the vegetation in August's family farmyard and the birds and stuff. So when she goes back to the yard after her grandpa's died, prosperous farm, there's a flock of pink-gray galahs. Here's a picture of those. Then she checks out the yellow box trees that have grown higher and broader. Here's a picture of those. And then she looks at the peppermint trees. Here are those. And so on and so on. And that was just to give myself more of a picture. I'm on a kind of a fascinating journey as a reader to focus on the setting, so that I can trying more to make a visual image. So these things really gave me more of an image of what prosperous farm looked like, and that was delightful. And I've been doing that for quite some time, but I'm doing it even more. This lovely novel is yielding fresh joy for me upon my bare start of rereading it. I've started this 1930 British novel, Diary of a Provincial Lady by E.M. Delafield. This is for the 1900 to 1950 readathon, and oh my god, what a joy. It's written in diary form. It's the closest to a Barbara Pym sensibility of anything I've read that wasn't written by Barbara Pym. It's so good, and it's such an easy book to just pick up and fall into, and you could probably put it down for 6 months and pick it up and still enjoy it. I mean, it's just episodic, and the protagonist, do we ever even know her name? She is a middle-class woman not in London, somewhere in the boonies, and her interactions of her book club. She's got a husband who just doesn't seem to give a shit about anything, and it's all and children and a maid and the village noblewoman who is a pain, and there's just something so delightful about her sensibility. It will be my first anything published by this very grey publisher that isn't a terrible book. And there's so many literary references that I somewhat giddily suggested to Roz. I didn't suggest it as something that she and I might do together, but I was delighted that she said she wanted to join me, that maybe in about a year from now or 2 years from now, I would like to do a reading challenge of reading all the novels referred to in this novel, because that might be a year's worth of reading. And for Springathon, this is my non-fiction pick, Towards a Prairie Atonement by Trevor Herriot. Published a few years ago, and Trevor Herriot is a naturalist, nature writer from Saskatchewan, and this is his story about conservation on the prairies. I didn't know anything about the fact that the grasslands of the prairies are disappearing and being cultivated to such a degree that it's going to totally fuck up everything about the ecosystem and the environment in the prairies. I'm not surprised, but I didn't know anything about it, and Herriot is discussing it in a way that doesn't come across as strident, but comes across as very passionate. For the most part, I think the writing is really beautiful. The story, I just read part 1. This is a buddy read with Lindy, and we have just checked in on part 1. It's a short little book. We probably could have read the whole book in 2 days, but we're spreading it over about 10 days. So part 2 is the story of some racist injustice that we, the settlers of Canada, and that is we, I got some pushback on that from some Canadian viewers. It's always we, perpetrated on a Métis community, and it had some connection to the environment. And then Atonement of more recent settler folk that wanted to right that wrong. So I think it's going to be a powerful story. I didn't know that atonement comes from at one. And in fact, one used to be pronounced in, I don't know, medieval times as own. And atonement means to make one again. So to reconcile, to make something whole, to make a community or a relationship, to heal it. Atonement. That's actually the etymology of the word atonement. Fascinating. I'll share a couple sentences from page 13. This sentence refers to wounds. He means damage that has been done to the land. Beneath each of these wounds is a midden of stories, bearing layers of loss and suffering that settlers too quickly lacquered over with tales of butter down the well and hogs in the horseradish. Colonialism, we have learned too late, is an utterly unreliable narrator. I love that sentence. Colonialism, we have learned too late, is an utterly unreliable narrator. This book is starting out wonderfully. I can't wait to continue. And I have started my reread of Justine by Lawrence Durrell, the first in the Alexandria Quartet. I did this as a buddy read in March of last year, I believe. It was, whenever the pandemic was starting to overtake all our lives. And I was going through such anxiety and having so much trouble focusing on what I was reading. This had been a buddy read with Adam of Memento Mori and I. And I think Adam was having similar issues. So we decided before we read Balthazar, the name I always blank on, I think I finally got it in my head. The second novel in this series is Balthazar. We're going to buddy read that next month, so we both thought it would be a good idea to reread this. So I am gotten a bare start on it. The writing is just as gorgeous, and the characters as mysterious, sexy, and Dionysian as I remembered. I could probably reread it 7 more times and there'd still be things that I wouldn't get. But I think I need to read, how do you pronounce that Greek poet's Cavafi? He's referred to so much in here. I'm thinking there's an ebook of his poetry that I might start reading alongside this, but it's not like I don't have enough to read, but I think that would repay. Dipping into his poetry. I should probably just read whatever's available free online. There's quite a few poems. It's intimidatingly gorgeous prose. Speaking of intimidating, I just got a bare start on the Virginia Woolf short story collection, The Mark on the Wall, and other stories. This is also for the 1900 to 1950 readathon, and I've been reading a lot, trying to finish stuff up, and I realized last night that I hadn't started it yet. So I sat down, I found an audio version on YouTube. It was a lovely narrator. She made a couple mistakes in what she was reading, but it was beautiful voice. I'll put a link to her reading in the show notes, and listened to it and read it last night. But I was tired, and I cannot read Virginia Woolf when I'm tired, so I didn't get very much out of the story. It was my favorite story last year, so I've decided this book might take me till the end of the year to finish, because I can only read Virginia Woolf when I'm fresh as a daisy, and if there's 10 stories in here, I might need at least 10 weeks. I still got something out of the story last night, but not nearly as much as that first time where I just sank into it. I wasn't able to do that last night, so I'll give it another try. I'm going to start a bunch this week. I want to talk about the ebook first so I don't forget it. One of the countries for invisible cities is Romania, and for that I will be reading, I believe it's a trilogy, it's a saga anyway. The author is Duiliu Zamfirescu, And he was born in 1858, died in 1922. He was a Romanian novelist, poet, lawyer, nationalist politician, journalist, diplomat, and memoirist. And he was the foreign minister of Romania in 1920. I have searched in vain to find out when it was published, but I think it might have been published in the 1890s, Volume 1. But if anybody knows, I'm finding it really frustrating to get information. But this one is called Love in the Countryside. Translated from the Romanian by Lucy Bing, revised by Alan Stroh. It's about upper-class characters and some lower-class characters, and that's all I have. I'm not going to dig anymore. I'll tell you more about it next week. I'm looking forward to starting it. Zamfirescu was considered the Romanian Tolstoy. So these are just as they're coming off the top of my pile. I have such a tiny little toadstool, mushroom-shaped table. I can't. I'm just feeling everything is awkward here. So for the Asian readathon, I am delighted to this week be embarking upon a 2-week buddy read with Freddie of Sluggish Reader. And this is I think it's a queer novel from Indonesia. Not a Virgin, by Nuril Basri, translated from the Indonesian by John H. McGlynn. Considered a contemporary Indonesian classic. And it is about a Jakarta teenager at an Islamic boarding school. And I don't know whether he's gay or who's gay, but there are cross-dressing hairdressers, drag queens, and rent boys, and fanatic Muslims. What could go wrong? I can't wait. And this one I will start in the coming week, but I probably won't finish it until June, and that will fit in well for my Pride reading for June, and that is this gay novel from 1919 in America, Bertram Cope's Year by Henry Blake Fuller. I've had it on my shelf forever. I'm using the excuse of the 1900 to 1950 readathon to finally get to it, but I'll probably end up reading most of it in June. And this one fits for both the Asian... Oh my god, the crows are up. And this one fits for both the Asian readathon and the 1900 to 1950. It's a 1937 novel from China. Rickshaw Boy by Lao She. Translated by Howard Goldblatt. I don't know anything about it. I remember Matthew Sharappa reviewed it, and he liked it. And it's about a rickshaw puller in Beijing. Now that I've just recently finished Beijing Coma, it'll be interesting to read a Beijing novel set decades and decades before. And finally, I will be starting my first novel by the Welsh novelist Rhys Davies, The Withered Root. Isn't that a lovely book? And it's for the same first half of the 20th century readathon. I'm getting a little... I don't want to say the name of the readathon anymore. It's tripping me up, tripping my tongue up. And it was originally published in 1927. It's about the last great Welsh revival. I don't know what that means, but I will find out. And it's set in 1904. The main character is a young, charismatic, Welsh-speaking collier preacher. I don't know what a collier preacher is. I'll tell you next week. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for watching.